Thank you for joining us for this briefing on the American Nuclear Society's Nuclear Energy Toolkit for the states. My name is Craig Piercy, and I'm the ANS Washington representative, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Just a little bit of a brief note about what our agenda is today. We're going to start with a brief introduction by the co-chair of the ANS Special Committee on Nuclear in the States, Donald Hoffman. Then we'll go to our other co-chair, Pete Lyons, former DOE Assistant Secretary of Energy, and then we'll move on to an overview of the toolkit by Special Committee member Ed Key. There will be an opportunity to ask questions of the presenters in the committee after the presentation. If there is time before noon, interviews with Special Committee members are also possible, but we do need to conclude at 12 noon sharp. At this point, what I'd like to do is go around the room and have each of the members of the special committee introduce themselves by name, title, and affiliation. And Don, let's start with you.
Certainly. I'm Donald Hoffman, President and CEO of Excel Services Corporation, past President of the American Nuclear Society, and co-chair of the ANS Special Committee for Nuclear in the States.
I'm Pete Lyons. I'm also one of the co-chairs. I retired last year as the Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy, about 5 years in that position. Prior to that, I was one of the commissioners at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and still prior to that was about 8 years as a science advisor to the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and many years at Los Alamos.
Edward Key, I'm the CEO of Nuclear Economics Consulting Group. I've been working in electricity markets and nuclear power for most of my career, and I'm happy to be a part of this committee.
Great.
Training McMurray, I'm an energy sector consultant and former PEC commissioner in Florida.
I'm Daniel Curtis. I'm a PhD student in nuclear science and engineering at MIT.
Nicholas Thompson, PhD student at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in nuclear engineering.
Cornelius Milno. I'm a private consultant with experience serving public agencies and private companies.
Yes, Andrew Patterson, principal with Environmental Business International.
Justin Knowles, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Tennessee.
All right. Next, what I'd like to do is go around the table here in the room, and each of the media, if they wouldn't mind just introducing themselves and name and organization, please.
Good morning. I'm Stephen Dolly with Platts. I edit Inside NRC. Joshua Sherman, Resilience Service.
Darius Dixon, Florida.
Let's continue to move on. So at this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce Don Hoffman, our co-chair, just to do a few introductory remarks about the ANS and the special committee. Don?
Thank you, Craig. This ANS Special Committee on Nuclear in the States was initially formed to evaluate the barriers at the local, state, and federal levels to new nuclear development in the United States. Given the current situation in our country, where we have 2 nuclear plants which have already shut down solely because of their inability to economically compete in the regions in which they operate, and the fact that 2 others have recently announced being shut down for the same very reason, we felt it was important for us to expand our scope. So we have expanded the scope of this special committee to develop tools to assist in defining the unique value of nuclear energy from the perspective of energy, economy, and the environment, to inform the state and federal policymakers to ensure that nuclear is appropriately valued in the implementation of the Clean Power Plan, and in the decision-making related to retaining the current nuclear fleet as assets in the states, the regions, and the national energy mix. And as a logical extension to that, to informing the policymakers on the issues necessary to address new nuclear build. The American Nuclear Society felt it appropriate for us to be the ones to form this group because of our large outreach. We represent more than 11,000 members with 33 nuclear university programs, local sections both here domestically and all over the globe. We represent all professionals in the nuclear science and technology field, from labs, utilities, industry, academia, and the government. And we believe in the contribution of nuclear science and technology to the improvement of the quality of life of humankind. We believe it's appropriate for us to be taking these actions and to expand our scope to ensure that these decision-makings related to nuclear energy are indeed informed in the most technologically and scientific manner. Pete?
Thank you. Let me start from the perspective that state government leaders have very few options for low-carbon sources of electricity, really only renewables, including hydro and nuclear power. In the future, of course, economical long-term storage and carbon capture, utilization, and storage may be available, but not now. And today, most solar and all wind must be treated as intermittent resources. And for those states with nuclear power plants, those plants are a vital resource, providing safe, clean, reliable power with stable costs that also will help meet future carbon emission limits. But with today's cheap gas, nuclear energy is not the lowest cost option in many states, and with renewable production tax credits and renewable mandates in many states, nuclear power is further economically disadvantaged today in some parts of the country. The nation has already closed 2 nuclear power plants for economic reasons, and more are at risk. This is a serious issue for the nation and for many states. Now, in my former job, and as one who continues to be deeply concerned with the nation's energy challenges and the need to address global climate change with reduced carbon emissions, I have tremendous concern if the country loses a low-carbon source by closing a nuclear power plant and then replaces it with carbon-emitting natural gas. And only natural gas is available today at a low cost to replace lost baseload power. Now, in addition, on a national level, a strong domestic nuclear program enables the United States to export its safety and non-proliferation standards around the world, and those standards are of vital national concern. Now, as Don indicated, our committee was formed to provide support for state leaders who share these concerns and are faced with potential loss of vital nuclear power plant assets due to economic pressures in their states. Today, our committee is releasing version 1 of the toolkit. Our hope is that this initial toolkit version and subsequent iterations and improvements of the toolkit will provide critical support for those state leaders by providing a compendium of potential ideas and approaches that they can consider to preserve their nuclear power plant assets. The toolkit isn't a single suggestion. It isn't a single silver bullet solution. Instead, it presents a range of tools, some easier to implement than others, which could be considered at the state level. And we fully recognize that a solution that works for one state may not work for another. We anticipate that different approaches may be better adapted to different states. And with that, let's turn it over to Chris.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Pete. Next up is Ed Key, a member of the committee that was very much involved in coordinating the construction of the toolkit. Ed, you have the floor.
Thank you, Craig. I'm going to talk about 3 things. What is this toolkit? What's it supposed to do? How we got it? Where did it come from? And why it's important. On the first point, this toolkit, and I'm holding it up now, those of you on the other side can't see this, it's a fairly long document. It's got a lot in it. It's got big things. It's got small things. The comprehensive list, we think, of things that can help nuclear power either stay alive if you're a merchant operating plant or for new nuclear in some states. It builds on actual experience in these markets and actual things that have been done in some states. There's a combination here of interesting and unusual things. The Clean Power Plan, for example, is on page 13 and 14. We talk about how to make electricity markets work better on about page 24. But 2 pages later, we talk about getting rid of those electricity markets altogether. So there's big controversial stuff in here as well as small practical items. So how do we get this? We came up with this idea about 6 months ago or so. And the idea was to have a list of things states could do to help keep these merchant plants from closing down because of economic pressures. This committee all gave suggestions and inputs, some a lot of suggestions, others maybe edits. We took input from other sources, from what's happening in the markets, what's happening in other entities, put together in an integrated document which has had a lot of polish to it by the folks at ANS. Thank you. We had a review for some outside entities. NEI, I guess, reviewed this and gave us comments. So it's been around a little bit, but it hasn't been out to the market, to the companies, to the states. That's the next step. Now, why is this important? As Pete just said, the nuclear power industry in this country is really in trouble, economic trouble, because markets and low natural gas prices and renewable penetration, we've seen 2 plants close already, merchant nuclear operating plants, massive loss of public benefits from those closures because the private owners couldn't make enough money to stay in operation. A couple more are on schedule to close down. These things could help them by giving them more revenue, more certain revenue, lowering impediments, and other matters. Losing those public benefits for the existing plants is very important. This may help states solve that problem, and there are some states where things are really exciting right now in that regard. The last thing I'll say about the importance of this is that the U.S. nuclear power industry is a world leader. If our existing plants close down and we don't build any new ones, which we might given the way the market's going, we could lose that position. In the end, we could be buying nuclear power plants from China in the 2030 to 2050 range to meet our goals for carbon.
Thank you, Ed. Don, any last comments before we move on to media questions?
Having heard the kinds of things that we're already beginning to do, and the fact that the Toolkit is in its first version for you, our intent is to start reaching out, and we have actually started reaching out to all of the governors who have any impact by the Clean Power Plan and any impact as a result of the nuclear facilities which operate in their states. While 30 of our states actually have nuclear facilities which operate, much of that energy is transported across state lines. So there's essentially no state that doesn't have some impact. And as a result, it's our intent to reach out to the individual governors and or their staffs to be talking to them about not only the toolkit, but also ensuring that they have the information necessary to appropriately value nuclear in their determination as how nuclear supports their asset mix of energy sources in their respective states. As Pete indicated, no one solution works the same for all the states. The variabilities exist from state to state. However, in the 4 governors we've already spoken to, we have found some resonance issues. We have found some commonality that recognizes that we need to be able to inform each of these groups about the common issues that address. As Ed also mentioned, the impacts on each of the states are significant from a standpoint of the localization, from the jobs, from the economy, from the tax base for infrastructure, including police, fire, and roads, schools, and things of that nature, from the economic tax base, from also the federal tax base, and the fact that the overall economic of what occurs cannot be underestimated, as has been evidenced by the shutdown of San Onofre in Southern California and Vermont, Yankee and Vermont. So as a result, we are working very hard to ensure that we are informing these individuals of the kinds of information that they need to make these informed decisions before they are made. It is our hope that we will be able to bring this information to bear as these states begin making these decisions. We're already seeing states like New York, Ohio, Illinois, California, Massachusetts, and others that need to have this kind of information, we believe, now in order to make the appropriate decisions. So we are pleased to have this opportunity and to begin reaching out and to informing individuals, including the press, as to what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Thank you, Don. So we have both media reps in the room here and also on the phone, so I'm going to alternate back and forth between those here, those present, and those on the webinar. So let's we'll throw it open to questions here among the media reps in the room. Feel free to, who has a question? Darius?
I guess in your discussions with governors and discussions with other stakeholders, how much is the nuclear waste problem an overhanging issue in terms of protecting the existing fleet?
In each of the states where we've spoken to the governors, at this point it's only been 4, the waste issue has come up, but there's a recognition on each of their parts, at least in the 4 states we've spoken to, that the waste issue is a federal issue, not just a state issue, and that while it impacts the state, there's a recognition that each of the nuclear power plants have the capability to continue to safely store the spent fuel at their respective sites, either in a liquid form, in water, or in an infancy or in a dry cask storage. So as a result, while they recognize that impact, it's more of a new nuclear build issue than it is a current operation of the facility issue. So most of their concerns are about the impact of the nuclear facility, not only on the energy providing aspect of it in the respective state, but also in the economic and the environmental impacts.
Can I add to that area? Wisconsin thinking about undoing their long-time ban on new nuclear, which was based on the...
Yeah, I think they've made the decision.
The bill is not fully through, but they're doing, the ban they had was based on not having a long-term spent use nuclear fuel repository. And I think the reality of the world today is much different than the 80s when that plan was put in place. There are economic, safe, and well-tested ways to store, use nuclear fuel. On-site dry cask storage is working. The realities of that are very different now, and so I think those issues about spent nuclear fuel largely have been diminished because we're doing it so well and the way we're doing it now.
Stephen Dolly with Flask. Can you all talk a little bit about some of the difficulties both in crafting the Clean Power Plan and now that it's out in giving value and credit for existing nuclear plants as opposed to new nuclear plants? I've been following this, of course, because it has major implications for nuclear, but it's not been down understood on the Clean Power Plan as much. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those difficulties were and how it came out and how you've also moved forward with giving existing nuclear a stronger role?
Yeah, I'll speak on that a little bit. I think that the EPA recognized the value of existing nuclear plants, but they also recognize the value of the new builds in the Clean Power Plan because they allowed states to credit those new builds towards their compliance goals. And so that has allowed the 5 nuclear plants that are in construction right now, 2 in South Carolina, 2 in Georgia, and 1 in Tennessee, to be credited towards those goals, and it's making the compliance for the Clean Power Plant much easier for those states because nuclear is able to serve that purpose.
I was asking about existing nuclear.
Well, isn't it correct to say that the Clean Power Plan does not directly value existing plants? There are ways in which you could perhaps move around the Clean Power Plan and get some value, but it's not direct value.
Correct. Sorry, I interpreted your question incorrectly.
That's right. In rate-based plans in the Clean Power Plan, there is no direct value at all for a generation from existing nuclear capacity. In mass-based plans, the credit is only indirect in the sense that the nuclear plants are providing generation that might otherwise be provided by fossil fuel emitting generators. And so my question is then, how does your toolkit and your plan and your working with the states get around the fact that you said the goal is to help the existing plants stay in business, which happens to be economic difficulties, but Clean Power Plan doesn't give credit for the existing plants. And the Clean Power Plan is only one component out of many in our toolkit. Ed mentioned we have a section on the Clean Power Plan. We have a lot of other tools we've taken a look at because the Clean Power Plan does not provide enough value to solve the problem in all states.
We recognize the Clean Power Plan may help at some point in the future for some plants in some states, but there are a lot of things in this toolkit that go well beyond and different from the Clean Power Plan to help those plants stay alive. And the motivation to possibly protect an existing nuclear power plant asset to the state really should be broader than just the Clean Power. It's Clean Power for the state that also provides stable costs for long term. All of those are to some extent over and above the Clean Power. And can I also add that the EPA's assumptions of what will happen in this country to meet their goals under the Clean Power Plan assume that most of those existing plants will stay in operation until some cases into their second 20-year life extension. If we get plants closing sooner, like this year, next year, for economic reasons, the entire basis for those plants is no longer valid. At that point, I would have to believe that the EPA or some part of government might take stronger action, but what that action is and when it might happen is uncertain.
I think another way of saying that is there's no guarantee that the Clean Power Plan is the last word, almost certainly is not the last word, on what this country's going to have to do for carbon reduction. It's a start.
important start. But at least in my mind, we've got to do a lot more, and we've got to go far beyond the electricity sector too. But that's another story.
Okay, and just one last quick follow-up on that. I mean, we just got the report since it just came out, and there wasn't much discussion in the introductory statements about what do y'all want to do?
Anything and everything is in this that could help us, say, keep an existing nuclear power plant in operation or get a new one built. So it's a comprehensive, wide-ranging list of things, big things, small things, old things, that you might be able to use in your state and you want to. Now, it's not a magic bullet. It's more like a Gatling gun or a shotgun. It's got a lot of things in it. All of them can help. Will any one of them do the trick? Maybe not. But the same we want to keep our nuclear power plant in operation, there are a lot of great ideas out here to do that.
Yeah, the larger context is that...
Please, I want to encourage everyone that speaks to identify
okay.
for the people.
Andrew Patterson with EBI. The larger context, as you all know, is the increasing partisanship inside the Beltway amongst Capitol Hill. We want to move in the other direction and broaden the dialogue about potential policy options. And we think the states are the best laboratory, if you will, for experimenting with some new approaches, particularly since there is no single policy that's going to keep all the nuclear plants running. Each of the states faces a different climate regime, a different urban energy use pattern, different mix of generation sources, different vulnerabilities to outages. And so the toolkit is an attempt to broaden the dialogue amongst states as a number of states are meeting to consider how they're going to comply with the Clean Power Plan and other objectives.
So this is Craig. I'm going to go to a question from one of our folks participating via webinar. The question is, how will you get regulators in states that are working to close nuclear, such as New York or California, to accept this roadmap?
Craig, this is Ed Key. I don't think that statement is based on a correct premise. There are certain parties in those states who might want to see the end of nuclear power. There are a lot of other people in those states at all levels in the government and the regulatory process who recognize the public benefits and elect to see those nuclear power plants in California and New York remain in operation. And these kits, this toolkit and the tools in it, could help the states come to some bipartisan consensus about things to do to protect those public benefits.
But an element of, sorry, go ahead.
Let's speak Lyons again, but another point I think that needs to be made, both in response to that question and to the previous question. The toolkit is one of tools, if you will, that this committee is working with. By no means the only one. We are also developing a fairly comprehensive report. It's still under development. It's not ready to hand out today. But in that report, we are trying to outline the benefits that nuclear power provides to the states. Now, I enumerated them very quickly as safe, stable costs, highly reliable, clean energy, tremendous economic benefits within each state of the nuclear power plant are covered in the broader report. So the toolkit isn't the only output of this committee. It's the only one that we're handing out today.
Mm-hmm. And this is Donald Hoffman, and if I may say that I couldn't agree more. The fact is that we are continuing to interface with the states and making plans to interface with all of the states in the contiguous United States governors and their respective staffs, and ensuring that they have all of the information necessary to make informed decisions. One of the things that we have discovered is that the value of nuclear is not equally understood from state to state and administrators to the value it actually provides from a number of issues, whether or not you talk about a megawatt being a megawatt. So as a result, we have discovered that this kind of information, while we understand it and we live it and breathe it every day, the fact is many do not. And so it's an important aspect of what this committee does is to go out and play a role of informing those decision and policymakers of the kinds of information that is necessary to ensure when they consider doing something with their nuclear power power plant assets in their respective states, that they understand both the positive and the negative impacts of doing same. And we have discovered, much to our dismay, that some of the impacts were not fully known or fully understood when the two plants that were already shut down prematurely solely because they couldn't economically compete. And so we want to ensure we start with Fitzpatrick, with the Pilgrim plants, and start expanding ourselves not only to New York but also California and the other impacted states that we believe are going to have decision-making processes in the near future.
Craig, this is Ed Key. One other point. The fact that New York State is trying to close nuclear plants may be what you get from reading the press. In fact, on page 8 in our toolkit, we talk about the New York State Clean Energy Standard that's been proposed. You can see that as a very, very positive step. Other states can learn from that. There's a staff white paper that was issued on that Clean Energy Standard in New York State just a few days ago. I encourage you to take a look at it. It could be the way to save those plants. It could be a model for other states.
Great. All right, questions from folks in the room?
I guess this toolkit has, like I said, a lot of, I think, very obvious things and a lot of very controversial things. And the nuclear industry is a pretty diverse group. So, I mean, where did you find perhaps the most resistance among utilities or any conversations you've had so far?
Well, let me be very clear. We haven't run this toolkit through utilities. This is coming from the American Nuclear Society. We're a professional organization. We care a lot about the nuclear power industry in this country, and we see this threat from markets as an existential threat to the industry that could end it. And so we're trying to save our industry. We haven't gone out and gotten input from the companies. I'm sure we'll hear from them. I look forward to that. We're starting to meet with states. We've had some very good responses from states. We had people from North Carolina and Maryland in our ANS national meeting last fall. They were very encouraged by this. I think they're going to respond nicely. It's a nice tool for them.
But again, it is just a beginning, Darius. This is Donald Hoffman. What we are discovering in our dialogues with the states is there are a number of entities who have to be appeased and addressed in this kind of an issue. This isn't if there was just one entity or organization we had to go to, this would be a much easier task. But the fact is we have to be able to address the owner-operator and satisfy his or her needs related to the actual economic impacts of continuing to operate any kind of facility, not less obviously a nuclear power plant. We have to be able to state to the Public Utilities Commission of that respective state, what does that mean to the rates? What does that mean to the continuous expansion of any kind of energy mix? We have to be able to speak to the state government, to the local governments. So there's a number of parties that we're addressing. And in doing so, what we're finding is that there's a diverse understanding of what the nuclear contribution really is. And that is a significant part of our responsibility in this special committee, is, as Pete said, not just to develop a toolkit which has a myriad of different kinds of tools that could be utilized and form fit to each state based on their unique specific needs, but also providing the information which you don't necessarily see in the toolkit, which is providing the values and details of what a nuclear power plant really does to support that state, and not only meeting its environmental goals, but also in meeting its economic needs and obviously its energy needs. And there's a number of different things we are discovering from state to state that we're bringing to the attention of the respective state legislators and policymakers that they themselves were not aware of. So it is our hope that this kind of information will enable them to make informed and intelligent decisions related to these important national assets of our current nuclear fleet.
You're going to, just as a quick follow-up, I mean, you may be having those conversations, or we'll get to have those conversations with the state legislators, but then ultimately you might face resistance from different segments of the industry.
Yeah. Can I just say something about it? The U.S. approach to nuclear power has neutral role. We have private ownership of these assets. And they're interested in making a profit. We understand that. But they have huge public benefits that aren't being compensated. And we're trying to find a way to reconcile the enormous public benefits, not the least of which is clean energy, no emissions, long-term stable costs, with a private owner who isn't being paid for those payments, who's got to make decisions. And in fact, it's a huge gulf between a private ownership and a plant losing money in a state and the enormous public benefits that will be lost if that plant closes down. How can we make that gap
closed, and somehow keep these things around for the country.
Yeah, if I might add, this is Andy Patterson with EBI. One of the reasons that the committee is focused on plants that are closing is it's in those situations where you can have a broader dialogue about more options. Because in those cases, the utility has run out of options under the conventional landscape. So therein lies an opportunity.
And again, that's just our initial focus. This is Donald Hoffman and Darius, and what we're discovering is that when we go and speak to these states, there are entities and organizations who have differing agendas. And because of the differing agenda, we have to be able to find some kind of compromise which basically benefits all, or to some extent angers all, whatever you want to look at it. But the fact is we're finding mechanisms and trying to be an honest broker from the technology and the science approach of what is the real value, so that when you're making these decisions, irrespective of the other things that are coming to bear, do you understand the impacts to the localization? And there's so many I could go through, but do you really understand the negative impact of shutting down a nuclear facility simply because it cannot economically compete in the region in which it operates? And one of the things we're talking about is treating these facilities as national assets. The reality being, some 2 decades ago, they took 6, 8, 10 years to design, license, construct, and place into operation at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars. Today, that time frame would probably be expanded, but it would definitely be billions of dollars. So to then look at this facility as if it could be shut down without any consideration of the financial impact of having done so, in addition to all the other impacts that are environmental and from an energy needs, just doesn't seem appropriate. So we believe that some of those decisions that were made were premature, were indeed not fully informed, and is our intent to get out in front of as many of those as we can, as quickly as we can. Hence, that's why we're approaching the 5 states we're approaching initially first, simply because those are the states in which nuclear power plants are in the most vulnerable position right now.
One other comment, please speak volumes, Darius. Certainly no secret that the new plants being constructed in the country are in areas where the industry is regulated. In regulated parts of our country, you've got public utility commissions that can look at a long-term point of view and ask what's best for their region, state, whatever it is, from a perspective of reliability, cost, fuel diversity, a broad range of considerations. But in a deregulated environment, you don't have those kinds of considerations. It's what is the price today is the most important thing that these shareholders are looking at. Now, there are steps to, and Ed mentioned several of them, there are steps in a number of states to try to introduce, for lack of a better word, let me say patches to deregulation that will start to say, you know, deregulation sounds good, but it has some unintended consequences. And trying to step back just enough to preserve the important public benefits of some of these assets. So that's at least another way of looking.
Yeah, let me talk about some more of those. There's the European Energy Standard, which could help some of the upstate plants stay alive. There's the Ohio Public Utilities Commission proceeding about deregulating the data setting plant. There's the Illinois Low Carbon Portfolio Standard, which will be passed now legislation this year, we hope. There was the Iowa Wayne Arnold contract that got signed a couple of years ago. They're mentioned in here. That plant, Wayne Arnold was in trouble. They looked at the state, they looked at the commission, and negotiated a long-term PPA extension, first agreement extension, and kept that plant alive. It wasn't easy, but it was done. So there's some positive movement out there. So there are things happening right now. States recognize that these things are huge economic benefits, and they're trying to find a way to keep them alive.
And this is Donald again. If I may say that one of the things you'll find in the toolkit is reform the energy market. And while that seems outrageous maybe on its face, the fact is the energy market is flawed. It's flawed significantly. And it's important that you note that the nuclear community is not asking for any special favors. It's not asking for anything unique. It's asking for a level playing field, which currently it does not have. And as a result, the value of nuclear is inappropriately and unfortunately undervalued, and as a result, we are not able to economically compete in regions in which others are simply because of subsidies and other activities which are performed. And all we're saying is if you're going to subsidize one, subsidize them all, or don't subsidize any, or treat us all equally based on what we uniquely provide. Not all energy assets are created equal. They all provide unique capabilities and competencies. We think that nuclear happens to provide some unique ones. We just think that they're woefully undervalued, and as a result, we are not capable of always economically competing. And therefore, because of that unfairness, and of course life's not fair, but the fact is that we want to ensure that there's some mechanism for leveling that playing field so that those decision makers and policy makers don't inadvertently shut down an asset which has significant impact to their constituency without realizing what that impact truly is.
This is only era. The piece that's something very interesting, inadvertent consequence of electricity market reform could be that there's no nuclear plant. And it's not just in this country we're learning that. If you look at the UK, they spent about 5 years reforming their long-term reformed markets for one purpose, to allow the government to help plan new nuclear plants. The result of a fairly comprehensive package for Hinkley Point C. Some people think it's a very expensive package, but it's the only way the government could get a new nuclear plant built in the UK. Hasn't quite gotten decided yet, so they spent a lot of time thinking about how do we get nuclear back in this electricity market environment. It wasn't easy for them. Yeah, it was.
Steve Dolly with Platt. Just following up on that, the Hinkley Point C example in the UK, do you see a potential role for this strike price model in the U.S.?
Well, certainly, and if you look at a couple of things, the Gannett resource RFSA, the Gannett deal they did to keep it around for a couple of years, is in effect a contract for difference. It basically keeps them whole against the market price. The Ohio PUC proceeding talking about a more global contract for differences approach for that bundle of assets. It's a way to keep these plants whole without setting a price that may not be the right price and having windfalls or further problems. So the contract for differences market model would work in places where there are markets. It's one catch you can put on it. Someone's got to be the counterpart. Who that is always a big question.
Any more comments from the floor here? Or questions?
I'm not a reporter, so I noticed happily that...
Just identify yourself.
Yeah.
John O'Donnell, I worked at NEI for many years, ran the DC office of Excel Energy for 15 years. Now I've started with Russ Sullivan, former chief of staff of the Senate Finance Committee, and a coalition called CARE, the Clean, Affordable, Reliable Electricity Coalition. Spending a lot of time on tax incentives and how they're playing out through the energy sector. And I noticed happily that you guys have put in a reference to federal tax treatment on page 19 of the report. But I wondered the extent to which you would be willing to comment on the notion that, you know, Fitzpatrick alone, the closure there, it would take 15 million solar rooftop installations to put out the same megawatt hours per year that just Fitzpatrick does. And I wondered why you didn't maybe embrace the tax code and some investment tax credit treatment for existing plants as a means of reflecting in federal policy the contribution that nukes give to keeping GHGs down.
Well, I think we have that on page 19.
Okay, right.
It was a more general comment. We could have gone into a lot more detail. We have about 500 pages, or like the tax code.
Yeah, I've got one.
We've seen it.
No, I think it's a great idea. We didn't want to go into the, why this and why that, and why not stop subsidies for renewables or equal them. It's a fair point.
Yeah. And we're 100 years now. This year is the 100th anniversary of using the federal tax code for energy issues, literally. And I don't think tax preferences are going away for energy, and if you can't beat them, join them. And there's some legitimate reason for nuclear being polluted. Couldn't agree with that. The tax code.
I agree. Couldn't agree more. The tool.
All right, any other questions from the floor here? All right. Well, I do want to thank everyone for participating today. We are going to, the committee will take a break here, so if any of you have any other questions, we'll have a little bit of discussion offline here, but this does conclude the webinar portion of our event here today. So I want to thank everyone for participating and let everyone know that there is an email address, nucleartoolkit@ans.org, where we urge anyone who has any other additional comments or questions about this can send it to that email address, and we look to incorporate a lot of the feedback and additional additions of this document. So with that, I thank you very much, and we'll sign off. Thank you.